Story 1. They are too calm in a crisis and too stressed during calm times. Story 2. They are highly independent because they learned not to rely on anyone. Story 3. They can always sense when something is off with someone else. Story 4. They are not surprised by awful things people do to each other. Story 5. Not trusting people is common. You can be friends for years and think you are close, but in fact you may not have the slightest idea what is going on in their lives. They could be staying up all night and feeling depressed, and the next morning say hello with a smile. They simply do not trust people anymore, no matter what anyone does. Story 6. They are truly grateful when someone treats them with humanity. Story 7. They act overly independent, as if asking for help were a weakness. Story 8. Overly kind people are those whose kindness does not expect anything in return. They make time for strangers and lend a hand to anyone they can, giving time, energy, and money. These people know that we only have each other, and most of them had no one when they needed help. Story 9. Hyper-aware. Probably not comfortable with eye contact. Story 10. They can quickly identify with you and empathize when you show the slightest sign of going through a hard time. Story 11. Saying sorry all the time. Another behavior I have noticed is people who say the phrase "if that makes sense." Someone has made them doubt themselves a lot. Story 12. It can take hours or even days for the nervous system to recover after a fright. Story 13. They seem to wait for bad things to happen and cannot imagine a good or normal outcome. Story 14. The kindest people have often been treated unkindly, and they do not want others to suffer as they have. Story 15. Knowing others' footsteps and being able to greet them without looking up. Story 16. They are really good at reading people and always in tune with the vibe in the room. Story 17. People who have been through some shit are reading these replies and realizing for the first time what their giveaways were. Story 18. They do not get wound up when something crazy happens. I saw a street fight. Everyone was hooping and hollering except one man who just stood there, shaking his head at the chaos. He appeared unfazed, as if he had seen it all and did not care about the commotion. Story 19. Their instinct, when they encounter a certain event, is to take deliberate steps to avoid it because they know where it leads. Story 20. Apologies a lot. Low expectations of others. Resting sad face. Story 21. Let's just say that if they can cry silently without you noticing, they have been through some shit. It's a learned behavior. Story 22. They laugh too hard or stay quiet too long. Story 23. You can tell that someone was abused as a child because they are jumpy and have low self-esteem. Story 24. I went through a lot of hardship when I was younger, and I find it hard to feel excited or laugh at things. I'm constantly stone-faced and angry. The only time I feel better or have a good laugh is with my husband because he's my safe person. Story 25. I know a couple of guys who have been to prison. They all have the same look in their eyes. I cannot describe it in a single word, but it is a combination of fear, hyper-awareness, and suppressed violence. Story 26. They may freak out over tiny inconveniences, but during major emergencies they remain perfectly calm and either know exactly what to do or show excellent adaptability. Story 27. Nothing bothers them because they have an easy way out if things get bad enough. Story 28. They do not talk much. They have dead eyes. They never get excited about anything. Story 29. Really funny people often have a fucked up story. Those of us who are witty have used humor as a safe place for decades before you hear the punchline. If you are not laughing, you are crying. The day I stop laughing is the day I will paint the wall. Story 30. Being extremely calm in stressful situations to the point where they are almost normal. Being independent and not seeking help when needed. Being lonely or without friends. Not being emotionally available and open with people. Story 31. Ooh, pick me. Ability to remain calm during chaos and times of stress but lose it over small things. Hyper-independence. Over-talking or under-talking with little to no in between. Attention to small details and shifts. Showing kindness because they know the world is not a kind place. Inability to accept gifts, love, or compliments. Story 32. These threads usually become lists of virtuous traits that Redditors like to believe they possess, reinforcing their self-perceptions. The responses are predictable and often karma-farming. Examples include kindest in the room, quiet and reserved, independent, and the staring into the distance cliché. What is rarely mentioned is that someone who has endured a great deal can be a motherfucker, a complete asshole. They may lack empathy because they never learned to value human life and adopt a kill or be killed mentality. This duality is obscured by the upvote system and the forum's predominantly upper-middle-class demographic, who often want to feel good about themselves. A subtle negative sign is low emotional responsiveness. They are not very emotional or empathetic in a direct way, and simply do not care as much as others might. Story 33. A 1,000-yard stare in the presence of the biggest threat. Story 34. They display inconsistent behavior. They can be highly present when it matters but absent for long periods. Their maladaptive behaviors appear correlated with hypervigilance and an overactive fight or flight response from the reptilian brain. They also have self-destructive habits and are overprotective of their identity or true self even if they cannot pinpoint who they are. Their relationships are disordered because they perceive others in dichotomous terms. Childhood trauma and complex post-traumatic stress disorder can disrupt the development of a healthy mind. Comorbidity with other mental illnesses is common and can produce personalities that seem extreme or exaggerated. Their worldview tends to be either too close to reality or too immersed in fantasy, and they often speak in absolutes. Story 35. They have an uncanny ability to read people and read the room. Typically, it is a trauma response learned in early childhood to avoid danger. They tune into shifts in tone and manner, movements, looks, and choice of words to escape being hurt physically, emotionally, or spiritually. By the time they reach adulthood, this skill has been honed into razor-sharp pattern recognition. They instantly know when someone is lying. They can sense an agenda and feel changes in the energy of the atmosphere. It also helps them recognize honesty, authenticity, gratitude, compassion, and empathy. It is both a blessing and a curse. Story 36. For me, it has been poor posture, public crying, and biting my tongue instead of speaking because who cares? Story 37. They have a meek demeanor, speak quietly, avoid taking up space, and explain and apologize too much. Story 38. They always apologize for things, even when it is completely harmless or when they are not at fault. Story 39. It can express itself in many different ways. There are some very antisocial, poorly adjusted people. Some people will bend over backwards for everyone. Some people turn to substances. Some people become very independent. Others become codependent. Look up the symptoms of complex post-traumatic stress disorder. A hard life does not turn everyone into a cool, strong, closed-off, wise person with an aura of mystery like you see in the movies. Story 40. They just don't care and will always choose that option. Sometimes it means silence. Other times it means they will crush you. Story 41. In my opinion, when someone has under-eye shadows all the time, it could be due to poor sleep, but I also think they have internalized trauma. Story 42. All of these seem pretty good. I was going to say a distant stare and a blank expression when no one is paying attention. Story 43. They get a glazed look in their eyes when faced with a trigger associated with a traumatic event. Their gaze appears lifeless. Story 44. It's wild how survival mode can rewire your whole definition of normal. Story 45. Over-explaining and apologizing a lot. Struggling to maintain eye contact. A sense of always being on edge or looking for danger. This is known as hypervigilance. Very light on their feet. They probably learn to walk quietly to avoid unwanted attention from their abusers. Excellent in a crisis but struggling with day-to-day tasks. They keep people at arm's length and always have their guard up. They might not show strong emotions or at least give that impression. During childhood, they may have been scolded, criticized, mocked, or otherwise discouraged from showing strong emotions, both positive and negative. Story 46. These people speak in a soft, kind, and understanding tone. They help and listen even when you shout, trying to understand why you are angry instead of reacting. They often help innocently without knowing your intentions. They simply want to support you because they feel misunderstood. Story 47. People who smile with their mouth but not their eyes are trying. Story 48. I have a high pain tolerance. As an adult, I realized it comes from how easily I can dissociate during intense pain, which is likely another survival mechanism I acquired from my lovely childhood. Story 49. This occurs when someone has small habits of self-protection that do not match the situation. For example, someone who remains calm in situations that make most people panic. Story 50. Being prepared for many things in everyday life or when going out. Story 51. I feel that the funnier you are at making everyone laugh, the more you have been through. Story 52. They are overly empathetic toward what people go through. Story 53. They do not ask many questions, especially personal ones, because they expect others to do the same. Talking about trauma can be very difficult. Even a question may trigger harrowing memories from the past. Story 54. They were far too nice. Someone was not so nice to them. Story 55. They do not blink when everything descends into chaos. They calmly handle it. Story 56. I spent a short time in jail. I noticed a correlation between how much pain people had endured and how many tattoos they had. This is not always the case, but it often seemed true. Story 57. You can detect subtle changes in another person's tone of voice, especially as you become closer to them. Story 58. They are silent and lack self-praise or ego. They defer conversation away from themselves and mostly smile and nod in friendly exchanges. They never brag and rarely share their stories. They try hard to remain invisible. Story 59. If there's one thing I've learned from all the replies, it's that there are a lot of Redditors who believe they have been through a lot. Story 60. They don't talk much. They just stand in the back and listen. They don't make eye contact. Story 61. Apologizing over small things. The number of times I have been told I do not need to apologize for them is ridiculous. Story 62. It depends on the kind of trauma they experienced and 1,000 other factors, both large and small. Some of the most reprehensible people experienced severe adversity. Some of the most decent people did as well. I think it partly depends on whether, when, and what kind of intervention occurred, and on the individual's physical, emotional, and psychological makeup. The only unifying trait I have noticed is that people who experience serious childhood trauma can read a room and the people in it. Some use that ability for good, some for harm, and others not at all. Story 63. They are extremely apologetic and kind. They always understand situations from other people's points of view and forgive others. Story 64. Giving up activities that could lead to a sense of worthiness before they even begin. For example, avoiding the use of your natural talents in meaningful ways that might elicit approval and challenge the belief that you are undeserving. Sabotaging opportunities or relationships that feel secure. Story 65. They have chronic anxiety but are able to carry on, living in a constant state of survival. Story 66. Speaking the truth. Not shying away from the hard things in life. Being real. Story 67. A similar post appears every week with almost identical wording. Story 68. Someone can be incapable, not to be confused with unwilling, of fully trusting others. Story 69. A dark sense of humor and the ability to make a joke out of anything, no matter how tragic. Story 70. I am usually very apologetic and afraid to say no. I have people-pleasing tendencies. Story 71. There are two kinds. One shows excessive kindness. They are not being nice or weak. They have reached the point of understanding that everyone is going through difficult times. The other does not allow anyone to help. Story 72. They feel comfortable being alone, sometimes a little too much. Story 73. Small signs include apologizing excessively, becoming jumpy over minor things, or shutting down when the mood shifts even slightly. You can tell they have had to tiptoe around things before. Story 74. They are strangely calm during actual emergencies, but become stressed over small things like running late or forgetting something minor. It is as if their brain has learned to handle real crises but never learned to lower the alarm response. Story 75. When something terrible happens, they can comfort others and handle the situation with surprising calmness. Story 76. I have been through it, and I am 45. I do not judge other people, and I have extreme patience because I was not shown these things for most of my life. If someone cuts me off in traffic, I do not care. If you are a homeless supporter of Donald Trump, I will still give you $5. Story 77. They carry a firearm concealed where it is legal. They never brag, never brandish, and they do not fetishize the weapon. It is like how serious photographers do not obsess over their gear. Story 78. When death happens, I just shrug my shoulders and get back to work. Story 79. They laugh louder than they should, but their eyes do not laugh. It is a small thing that most people will not notice, but if you pay attention you can feel that the person has learned to hide their pain behind excessive gaiety. Story 80. I have complex post-traumatic stress disorder and I have been told it is a sign that I often, by accident, stare into the void on days when my mind is not kept busy. Story 81. Sometimes it's the way they over-apologize for small things like taking up space or asking a simple question. Story 82. I feel both seen and called out in the comments section. Story 83. There is a lack of eye contact. Everyone is so quick to call others liars. The truth is that the liars are the ones who stare you in the eye, watching your facial expressions to make sure you believe their lies. We simply speak the truth without seeking conflict. Story 84. Clumsiness in familiar spaces is often associated with hypervigilance because people assume their surroundings will remain the same and are focused on other things. They also need constant background noise. Story 85. How heavily they sigh and how dark the bags under their eyes appear. Story 86. A subtle sign is how someone reacts to small stressors. If they remain unusually guarded, overly cautious, or quietly tense, it often hints at past trauma. They might also have a dry or dark sense of humor or seem hyper-aware of others' moods without saying much. Story 87. I knew someone who refused to sit anywhere he could not see the door or window. Years later, the story came out and it finally made sense. Story 88. You say something like, "My mom will kill me," and people think you are serious. This happened with a friend in high school when I first met her. She had come from a terrible part of Virginia and had experienced extreme trauma. Story 89. They have a clearer sense of what the worst possible outcome of the situation might be. Story 90. When someone is overly sensitive to jokes at their expense and is very kind, it often stems from repeated negative treatment over time that becomes a character trait. This is not a hard rule. I often notice it in people who have been bullied or who have had an emotionally abusive partner or family member. Story 91. They are very kind but hard on themselves, apologetic and prone to overthinking. Story 92. Really dark humor. Living through terrible experiences makes people see the funny side of horrible things. Story 93. A subtle sign is humor that cuts too sharply. People who have lived through storms often hide scars in sarcasm. It slips out in jokes that land heavily, making you laugh and wince at the same time. Story 94. There is a constant state of fight or flight. It is not full-blown, but it is always present. Story 95. They apologize for existing, not only for mistakes but for being. Story 96. Anxious, fearful, or dismissive attachment styles. Story 97. Look them in the eyes. You can see they are broken. Story 98. They are silent walkers, usually the result of childhood trauma. Story 99. Things I still cannot shake as an adult. I flinch and startle easily when things come too close to my face or when people approach from behind. I carry large bags even for short trips, expecting things to go wrong. I bring water, a workbook, makeup, a backup power supply, and so on. I feel anxious in calm situations and in relationships. I always have a plan B and plan C for life and have difficulty committing. I still cannot trust things to go right. I moved out of my family home or moved abroad at a relatively young age. I feel as if decades are missing because I have few memories from my childhood and teenage years compared with others. Story 100. In my experience, people with self-deprecating humor have often had their self-worth broken by someone they loved. They make fun of themselves before someone else can. Story 101. Need to perform cardiopulmonary resuscitation? Honestly, it is the easiest job of all. No problems. Ask me to book a restaurant for 10 friends, and I will stress for 1 month and then cancel. Story 102. Excessive apologizing is often said without the person realizing what they have said. For example, I apologized to my dog yesterday for accidentally brushing against her leg. Story 103. I am not sure if it is subtle, but missing teeth are usually due to hardship in life. Story 104. Someone who bounces back quickly has learned the art of hitting rock bottom. If you do it enough times, you learn how to get out of it. Story 105. For me, it is when I notice a younger person in their early 20s trying to emulate proper social interaction rather than effortlessly existing in social settings. That makes people think they are a bit slow, instead of recognizing that they are only now learning social skills that should have been inherent since childhood and developing a frame of reference for how to speak and behave. For instance, when people who had normal childhoods stand around and share stories from when they were kids, including bad things that happened to them or were done to them, then it is the traumatized person's turn to speak and I can see the gears turning. Should I share this? Was it normal? What should I leave out? Will I see that familiar look of horror on their faces if I mention this? What details should I change? Your experience forces you to constantly analyze whether you should act or react differently, and it makes you seem odd to other people. I am 33 now and recently had a 20-year-old coworker who was a bit slow around other coworkers, but otherwise extremely quick and intelligent. The more we talked, the more I could see his mental guard drop once he realized he could talk freely one-on-one. I felt a little pity remembering how difficult it was to figure out how to be a person at his age. There is so much to learn and you cannot even begin to understand how far behind you are. Story 106. They always say excuse me, I'm sorry, and my mistake. Story 107. It's easy for us to joke about trauma, and sometimes we don't realize how horrifying that is for other people. Story 108. Resilience to handle difficult and unexpected situations. Story 109. I don't take anything seriously. People at work get kind of mad at me because of my quips. Story 110. Silent, but not shy. If I'm in a crowd of people I do not know and everyone else is talking while one person stands quietly by the door, I assume that person is the dangerous one, someone who has seen things. Story 111. I cannot take compliments. I feel shame and anger when I am complimented. I am speaking from experience. Story 112. When someone makes dark jokes or laughs at the wrong time. Story 113. I was going with a face tattoo, but I guess that's not very subtle. Story 114. They cut through the clutter and offer sage advice that you appreciate. Story 115. Stay calm through whatever problems they are facing and remain distant. Story 116. In my personal life, the biggest sign is getting along as if we've been friends forever. It's a quiet understanding that we've been through it and do not judge. People who are well-adjusted can seem off-putting. Story 117. Subtle signs often show a person has been through it and moved on. Things like calm when most would not be, compassion, giving people second through 11th chances, or a general ability to forgive far more than most. People like this are survivors, and the last thing they want is for someone else to have to survive the way they did. Story 118. They are very patient, and if bad things happen, they just let it pass. Story 119. They know how to react in serious situations without hesitation. Story 120. An insane amount of patience. There's a reason for that. Story 121. These comments are excellent for tweaking my masking ability. Story 122. They might have a quiet intensity. Small gestures, wary eyes, or a calm that masks deep experience, showing they have survived more than most would guess. Story 123. This is random, but as a nurse I have found that one sign is how patients handle a nasopharyngeal test for coronavirus disease 2019, the deep brain tickler. Patients who have experienced the test medically tend to close their eyes, inhale, and endure the procedure. Story 124. One subtle sign is when someone laughs at things that are not really funny, as if they are trying to keep the atmosphere light. They may also dodge deep questions with a joke or a quick change of subject. They are very good at comforting others because they know what it feels like to need comfort and not receive it. Sometimes it is evident in small habits, such as checking the exits in a room, keeping their phone nearby, and overthinking before speaking. Story 125. They constantly scan their surroundings in any public or unfamiliar place. Story 126. A person who senses another's awkwardness and gently offers an escape so that no one else notices and the person does not feel embarrassed. Story 127. They are constantly watching and listening to what is going on in the room. They also walk very quietly. Story 128. They accept bad things that happen to them much more readily than good things. Thanks a bunch for sticking around till the end of the video. Remember to subscribe, and until next time, stay awesome and goodbye.